We're going to continue of Mice and Men with Chapter 4. I'm on page 42 of 53 on our Cami document. And just to remind us before we start reading what our themes are, we're looking for, as we're reading, evidence of broken plans, the American dream, friendship and companionship, and minorities and stereotyping. To remind us what just happened at the end of Chapter 3, we see that Curly's wife had entered the space of Crooks's home, and Candy and Lenny and Crooks had been sort of dreaming about having the security of a ranch, being free of judgment, having that American dream of security and having the companionship of each other, feeling wanted and needed, right? Everyone having a job, being important on their own ranch. Curly's wife comes in, and we've talked about her character as being an outcast, being rejected, just like all the other guys, but they kind of band together as a little group of outcasts and even further banish her or make her feel like an outsider. And so she retaliates in a very cruel way, making Crooks feel belittled, being incredibly racist, and then kind of takes that dream away from him again. She maybe wants other people to feel the sadness that she has, the loneliness she has, the desperation. And so that's how racism sort of has characterized or been forced to characterize Crooks in that way. So let's keep going. Chapter 4. The end of the great barn was piled high with new hay, and over the pile hung the 4 Talon Jackson forks suspended from its pulley. The hay came down like a mountain slope to the other end of the barn, and there was a level place as yet unfilled with the new crop. At the sides, the feeding racks were visible, and between the slats the heads of horses could be seen. It was Sunday afternoon. The resting horses nibbled the remaining wisps of hay, and they stamped their feet, and they bit the wood of the mangers and rattled the halter chains. The afternoon sun sliced in through the cracks of the barn walls and lay in bright lines on the hay. There was the buzz of flies in the air, and the lazy afternoon humming. So setting sort of this peaceful, quiet scene with this descriptive language like Steinbeck does. From outside came the clang of horseshoes on the playing peg and the shouts of men playing encouraging jeering, but in the barn it was quiet and humming and lazy and warm. Only Lenny was in the barn, and Lenny sat in the hay beside a packing case under a manger in the end of the barn that had not been filled with hay. Lenny sat in the hay and looked at a little dead puppy that lay in front of him. Lenny looked at it for a long time, and then he put out his huge hand and stroked it clear from one end to the other, and Lenny said softly to the puppy, "Why do you gotta get killed? You ain't so little as mice. I didn't bounce you hard." He bent the pup's head up and looked in its face, and he said to it, "Now maybe George ain't gonna let me tend no rabbits if he finds out you got killed." He scooped a little hollow and laid the puppy in it and covered it over with hay. Out of sight, but he continued to stare at the mound he had made. He said, "This ain't no bad thing like I got to hide in the brush. No, this ain't. I'll tell George I found it dead." He unburied the puppy and inspected it, and he stroked it from ears to tail. He went on sorrowfully, "But he'll know. George always knows. He'll say, 'You done it. Don't try to put nothing over on me.' And he'll say, 'Now just for that, you get to tend no rabbits.'" Suddenly his anger rose. "God damn you," he cried. "Why do you gotta get killed? You ain't so little as mice." He picked up the pup and hurled it from him. He turned his back on it. He sat bent over his knees, and he whispered, "Now I won't get to tend no rabbits. Now he won't let me." He rocked himself back and forth in his sorrow. So maybe a good place for broken dreams here. Lenny's feeling like this dream that he had isn't attainable now that he's made this mistake. From outside came the clang of horseshoes on the iron stake, and then a little chorus of cries. Lenny got up and brought the puppy back and laid it on the hay and sat down. He stroked the pup again. "You wasn't big enough," he said. "They told me you wasn't. I didn't know you'd get killed so easy." He worked his fingers on the pup's limp ear. "Maybe George won't care," he said. "This here goddamn little son of a bitch wasn't nothing to George." Curly's wife came around the end of the last stall. She came very quietly so that Lenny didn't hear her. She wore her bright cotton dress and the mules with the red ostrich feathers. Her face was made up and the little sausage curls were all in place. She was quite near to him before Lenny looked up and saw her. In a panic, he shoveled hay over the puppy with his fingers. He looked sullenly up at her. She said, "What you got there, sonny boy?" Lenny glared at her. "George says I ain't have nothing to do with you, talk to you, or nothing." She laughed. "George giving you orders about everything?" Lenny looked down at the hay. "Says I can't tone no rabbits if I talk to you or anything," she said quietly. "He's scared Curly'll get mad." "Well, Curly got his arm in a sling, and if Curly gets tough, you can break his other hand. You didn't put nothing over on me about getting it caught in no machine." But Lenny was not to be drawn. "No, sir, I ain't gonna talk to you or nothing." She knelt in the hay beside him. "Listen," she said. "All the guys got a horseshoe tournament going on. It's only about 4 o'clock. None of them guys is going to leave the tournament. Why can't I talk to you? I never get to talk to nobody. I get awfully lonely." Which might be a good place for you to talk about companionship, right? That she has no companionship, how desperate it's made her. Lenny said, "Well, I ain't supposed to talk to you or nothing." "I get lonely," she said. "You can talk to people, but I can't talk to nobody but Curly, else he gets mad. How'd you like to not talk to anybody?" Lenny said, "Well, I ain't supposed to. George's scared I'll get in trouble." She changed the subject. "What you got covered up there?" Then all Lenny's woe came back on him. "Just my pup," he said sadly. "Just my little pup." And he swept the hay from on top of it. "Why, he's dead!" she cried. "He was so little," said Lenny. "I was just playing with him, and he made like he was gonna bite me, and I made like I was gonna smack him, and I done it, and then he was dead." She consoled him. "Don't you worry none. He was just a mutt. You can get another one easy. The whole country is full of mutts." "It ain't that so much," Lenny explained miserably. "George ain't gonna let me tend no rabbits now." "Why don't he?" "Well, he said if I'd done any more bad things, he ain't gonna let me tend the rabbits." She moved closer to him and she spoke soothingly. "Don't worry about talking to me. Listen to the guys yell out there. They got $4 betting that tournament. None of them ain't gonna leave till it's over." "If George sees me talking to you, he'll give me hell," Lenny said cautiously. "He told me so." Her face grew angry. "What's the matter with me?" she cried. "Ain't I got a right to talk to nobody? What do they think I am anyways? You're a nice guy. I don't know why I can't talk to you. I ain't doing no harm to you." "Well, George says you'll get us in a mess." "I'm nuts," she said. "What kind of harm am I doing to you? Seems like they ain't none of them cares how I gotta live. I tell you, I ain't used to living like this. I could have made something of myself," she said darkly. "Maybe I will yet." And then her words turned out in a passion of communication, as though she hurried before her listener could be taken away. "I lived right in Salinas," she said. "Come there when I was a kid. Well, a show come through, and I met one of the actors. He says I could go with that show, but my old lady wouldn't let me. She says because I was only 15, but the guy said I coulda. If I went, I wouldn't be living like this, you bet." Lenny stroked the pet back and forth. "We gonna have a little place and rabbits." So, pause. This could be her broken dreams, right? She thought she was going to be an important person in this world, and it ends up that she kind of missed her opportunity. Also, if we go back up here, we can see right here, her face grew angry. This is kind of a place for a note on stereotyping, right? They stereotype Curly's wife, and it pushes her into isolation and causes her to feel worthless. This is also Linnea talking about his American dream. She went on with her story quickly before she could be interrupted. "Another time I met a guy and he was in the pictures. He went out to Riverside Dance Palace with him. He says he was going to put me in the movie, says I was a natural. Soon as he got back to Hollywood, he was going to write to me about it." She looked closely at Lenny to see whether she was impressing him. I never got that letter, she said. I always thought my old lady stole it. Well, I wasn't going to stay no place where I couldn't get nowhere to make something of myself, and then where they stole your letters. I asked her if she stole it too, and she says no, so I married Curly, met him out to the Riverside Dance Palace that same night. She demanded, you listening? Me? Sure. Well, I ain't told this to nobody before, but I oughtn't to tell you. I don't like Curly. He ain't a nice fella. And because she had confided in him, she moved closer to Lenny and sat beside him, maybe kind of telling a secret, so she's gaining companionship, right? Oftentimes, telling something to someone else that's maybe shameful or a secret brings you close together. She's looking for someone to connect with, to be heard, maybe. Could have been in the movies and had nice clothes and all them nice clothes they like they wear. And I could have sat in them big hotels and had pictures took of me. When they had them previews, I could have went to them and spoke in the radio, and I could have cost me a cent because I was in the picture. And all of them nice clothes like they wear, because this guy says I was a natural. She looked up at Lenny. She made a small, grand gesture with her arm and hand to show that she could act. The fingers trailed after her leading wrist, and her little finger stuck out grandly from the rest. Lenny sighed deeply. Somebody made a ringer. Oops. From outside came the clang of a horseshoe on metal, and then a chorus of cheers, said Curly's wife. Now the light was lifting as the sun went down, and the sunstreaks climbed up the wall and fell over the feeding racks and over the heads of the horses. Lenny said, maybe if I took this pup out and throwed him away, George would never know, and then I could tend the rabbits without no trouble. Curly's wife said angrily, don't you think of nothing but rabbits? We gonna have a little place, Lenny exclaimed patiently. We're going to have a house and a garden and a place for alfalfa, and that alfalfa is for the rabbits. And I take a sack and get it full of alfalfa, and then I take it to the rabbits. So that's his sort of American dream, his hope in freedom and independence. She asks, what makes you so nuts about rabbits? Lenny had to think carefully before he could come to a conclusion. He moved cautiously close to her until he was right against her. I like to pet nice things. Once at a fair, I seen some of them long-haired rabbits, and they was nice, you bet. Sometimes I even pet mice, but not when I couldn't get nothing better. Curly's wife moved away from him a little. I think you're nuts, she said. No, I ain't, Lenny exclaimed earnestly. George says I ain't. I like to pet nice things with my fingers, soft things. She was a little bit reassured. Well, who don't, she said. Everybody likes that. I like to feel silk and velvet. Do you like to feel velvet? Lenny chuckled with pleasure. You bet by God, he cried happily. And I had some too. A lady gave me some, and that lady was my own Aunt Clara. She gave it to me, about this big a piece. I wish I had that velvet right now. A frown came over his face. I lost it, he said. I ain't seen it for a long time. Curly's wife laughed at him. You're nuts, she said. But you're kind of a nice fella, just like a big baby. But a person can kind of see what you mean. When I'm doing my hair, sometimes I just sit and stroke it because it's so soft. To show how she did it, she ran her fingers over the top of her head. Some people kind of got kind of coarse hair, she said complacently. Take Curly, his hair is like wire, but mine is soft and fine. Of course, I brush it a lot. That makes it fine. Here, feel right here. She took Lenny's hand and put it on her head. Feel right around there and see how soft it is. Lenny's big fingers fell to stroking her hair. Don't you muss it up, she said. Lenny said, oh, that's nice, and he stroked harder. Oh, that's nice. Look out now, you'll muss it. And then she cried angrily, stop it now, you'll muss it all up. She jerked her head sideways, and Lenny's fingers closed on her hair and hung on. Let go, she cried, you let go. Lenny was in a panic. His face was contorted. She screamed then, and Lenny's other hand closed over her mouth and nose. Please don't, he begged. Oh, please don't do that. George will be mad. She struggled violently under his hands. Her feet battered on the hay, and she writhed to be free. And from under Lenny's hand came a muffled screaming. Lenny began to cry with fright. Oh, please don't do none of that, he begged. George gonna say I done a bad thing. He ain't gonna let me tend no rabbits. He moved his hand a little, and her hoarse cry came out. Then Lenny grew angry. Now don't, he said. I don't want you to yell. You gonna get me in trouble just like George says you will. Now don't you do that. And she continued to struggle, and her eyes were wild with terror. He shook her then, and he was angry with her. Don't you go yelling, he said. And he shook her, and her body flopped like a fish, and then she was still, for Lenny had broken her neck. Okay, we're going to pause there, and we'll come back and we'll keep talking about this, and we'll keep moving forward. Thanks, guys.